Right, so I'm going to talk about linking text to maps. I do lots of natural language meets sort of structure stuff, but today I want to focus on maps, in part because a lot of this is the work of my most recently graduated PhD student, Zayu Jiang, and we have some cool, interesting new results. Okay, so what do I mean? All I really mean is looking at text, so phrases like San Jose is the largest city in Northern California, and figuring out what San Jose is the text S-A-N-J-O-S-E really referring to. It turns out there's a lot of San Jose's across the world, like 16,000-ish. Obviously, you as a human can read that and guess that the San Jose at the beginning of this sentence is probably the one in California, because it literally says California at the end of the sentence, right? So there's information there that would tell you that. What does this problem actually look like? It means taking that text San Jose and matching it to an ontology or a taxonomy or whatever you like to call it that has the information about all of the different geographic regions in the world. So in this case, we're working with GeoNames. You can see little screenshots here from GeoNames. GeoNames has all kinds of stuff in there, not just the names and their polygons, but also structural information like this first San Jose is the one in Costa Rica. It's in sort of administrative districts. You can see that the other one is a San Jose in the United States within the California region. There's other information like population and latitude, longitude, et cetera, et cetera. So the goal is to go from the text to these sort of ontology entries that tell you exactly which San Jose am I talking about. Okay, so this is sort of a text to structure problem. Okay. This is the classic solution, and by classic I mean like last year instead of this year. Although the approach here, something like this approach has been the way to do this since about 2017 or so. What does this look like? Well, the first thing you do, so we'll take our running example. It's a Northeast Texas thing, not just a Paris thing. Dallas media stations reported the same message as a hoax, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the document. And the mention that we're trying to resolve in this case is the one in the square, which is Paris. Right? So which Paris does it mean? How many people think that means the Paris in France? Okay, good. You're paying attention, right? Probably not the Paris in France. All right, so the first step in most approaches is we would think of this as sort of a generate and re-rank approach. So you first go to some sort of index of this gigantic GeoNames ontology and ask, here's Paris. What things should I consider? What Parises could it be? And geographic names work pretty well here because there's not that many different ways of spelling Paris. So you can sort of imagine that classic information retrieval systems, like what you're used to with Google search, will work fairly well. And if you run Paris into a query of this index, in this case we're using Lucene, which is a standard information retrieval system over the GeoNames ontology, you'll get back things like all of these different Parises. So the Paris that's in France, the Paris in Texas. There's actually two Parises in Texas because you can either refer to the city, the actual administrative district, or the city, and they're both. Like there's the city of Paris, which is slightly different from Paris, but anyway, confusing. Geographic people probably care a lot about these things, but for our purposes, there are two very similar Parises, both in Texas, and only one of them is right. And then there's a Paris in Canada, et cetera, et cetera. I'm only showing 4 examples here because there's only that much room on a slide, but there's thousands of Parises. Okay, so once you've retrieved these, now you would like to, this is just sort of a simple text matching lookup. So how do you tell which of these is the best one? Probably the simple information retrieval system can't figure that out. So what do? You pass it through some kind of classifier. And it's 2024, so the classifier is always a transformer network these days. How do we do this? We basically just take the information from the candidate. So, could it be the Paris in France? So we're going to put in Paris and FR and whatever other information is in that ontology entry that we think might be helpful. And then we're going to throw in what's in the text somehow in some form. In this case, well, the mention itself says Paris, and also we have the entire text. In most cases, we can't actually fit the entire text because these transformer networks can only fit about 500 to 1,000 words in there. So if you have a big document, you can't put it all in there. I could give a whole different talk on how you decide which parts to put in. But for our purposes right now, the high-level view is, you basically turn the ontology entry into a bunch of text. You take the text and put it in as well, and then you just ask the transformer, the machine learning model, to say, okay, which of these looks like a better match? Hopefully, if everything worked out right, the machine learning classifier says, oh, well, this second one looks like a better match because you know, the ontology entry says it's in Texas, and I see this Texas in the context, and so they're probably the same. So that's what's happening here at the bottom. Hopefully, if everything worked out right, you get zeros for everything that isn't the right match and a 1 for the thing that is the right match. Okay? We have a very successful version of this approach that was published last year, and there are a few other different papers using non-transformers that do something along these lines. Our new cool thing is a little bit different. Instead of trying to throw everything into the machine learning model, I'm a machine learning person, so we like to throw everything in the machine learning models, but you could not do that. So that's what we're going to do in this alternative version that's going to turn out to work better. And so the intuition behind this is that the document at the top doesn't actually tell us a piece of information that would be useful to know, which is that document is talking about something in the United States, right? It never says United States, but we as readers can guess that because it says things like Northeast Texas and Dallas. And you put all those things together, you have a pretty good idea that's probably about the United States. Well, we could just train a text classifier to take text as input and try to guess which country it's about. And in texts like this, it should be able to do a pretty good job because there's lots of nice keywords for doing these things. And you can ask multiple things. So in this case, we're going to train just a simple text classifier that's going to take the text and the mention that we're trying to make predictions about and say, what country do I think that mention is in? What state do I think that mention is? I say state, but you know, for other countries, it's whatever the second administrative district is. So, you know, the next sort of region down. And then there's this feature type that exists in geonames. P means populated place. You can get other things like countries or rivers or stuff like that. So it's just sort of a code that says, you know, it's something that's in the ontology that you can sort of imagine that would help you filter things down, right? If I know I'm looking for a river versus a city, that should be pretty informative when I decide which of these many candidates to pay attention to, okay? So we train classifiers to do that. We use something, sort of a prompt-based version. If you've done anything with large language models, this is very popular with large language models. We're not actually going to use a large language model here, although we have done some experiments with those. The idea here is rather than put in the entire document, we're just going to put the key pieces of information, which are the locations that are mentioned in the document. And we'll sort of make up a prompt. So the prompt says, this document discusses these location mentions. And then I just list all the mentions. So Texas, Paris, Dallas, in which Paris is, and then it's just a fill in the blank that I'm going to ask the machine learning model to do. So, hey, machine learning model, fill in the blank. It's blank located in blank of blank. And over training, it's going to learn that that first one is always one of these like populated place or city or river. The second one is always a state, and the last one is always a country. Okay? It turns out it's pretty possible to train a classifier to do that. The information is there in the text in many, many cases. And the cool thing is it's able to make some inferences that aren't explicitly in the text, right? The text never says United States, but you can figure that out because the mentions in there are very indicative of the United States. That's the end of machine learning. So now, rather than doing this complicated thing where the machine learning combines the ontology and the text and somehow makes some sort of cross-referencing analysis, no, you just simply filter. There's a little bit of elaboration into how the filter works, so there's a little bit of a re-ranking kind of thing going on there, but it's all deterministic. There's no machine learning at all. You just take the predictions of that classifier and you say, does it match? So in our running example, the only of those 4 examples that is a populated place in the United States within Texas is this one. So that's our answer. So does it work? Yes, it works, or I wouldn't be talking here. So this last one, Jung and Bethard, 2023, that's pretty much the version that I gave you in the 2 slides ago. And the current one, which we call GeoPlace, you can see that there's 3 different data sets. So local global news, GeoWeb news, and I forget what the TR stands for, TR news. They're basically all sort of news geographic resolution problem data sets. So they give you the same kind of thing we saw, Paris, right? Which Paris does this refer to? And we get pretty much the same performance as our old approach with GeoWeb news, and substantially better on these other 2, right? If you think about it, we were at 92%, we're now at almost 95%. That is a huge error reduction, right? There's not a lot of room left to solve. In fact, that data set might sort of be solved by our model. And for local global news, we go up from about 81 to 86, which is a pretty huge jump. So yeah, that's basically it. That's all I wanted to talk about. I think the cool intuition here is sometimes you can get away with less machine learning. So.
So I'm actually going to talk about two things. So ecological phenophase prediction, which I've spoken, both of these I've spoken about before, so there's just some new things in there. I don't know how many people have, maybe more than half have seen this before, so I'm going to go pretty quick. There's a lot of slides. The other I'll be talking about is topic analysis of National Science Foundation with financial attributions for those. So looking at phenophase, first, phenophase is when things happen in the natural world, like when the flowers come on to open up, and when the leaves open up, and when the leaves fall off, and all that sort of stuff. And why do we care? And it's because there's a thing called synchrony, and where different species have become accustomed to the pattern when things should happen. And if they don't happen, you get into an asynchrony. So things like the birds don't return in time to eat all the insects that are in the forest, and therefore the insects run amok for an extra month or so and eat the leaves and reproduce and do nasty things, and then the trees die. And then the birds come and there's nothing to eat. And yeah, so nasty things happen if you don't know. So we'd like to be able to predict when things happen. Before we can predict when things happen, we should get some records, historical records of when things happened before. So there's some human networks for doing that, but we'd like to automate some of that using photography. So there's a USA National Phenology Network, is hundreds, thousands of volunteers around the world, foresters and other people, collect phenophase data by hand. So we can use that as a training set to verify against, to try to do some machine learning and other non-machine learning algorithmic approaches to extracting information from images. We can make some observations that what the humans are looking at, for example, is when are the flowers opening on a red maple? So they're really tiny and they open in the spring. The buds are actually there starting in the fall. But there's an expansion of those in the early spring. So you can see the forests sort of change color a little bit to red. And we're hoping we can exploit some of that, those characteristic images, so that we can get more accurate data than the humans. So right now the humans go out like once a week, but really we would like to know day by day when these things were happening. So we could bootstrap the coarser data that's being provided by humans and combine it with daily images that are being taken, and from that make better estimates of when the beginning and end of the individual phases are. So this is just multiple years changes in the maple pollen cone formation. So the flowers are pollen cones. So pollen cones if it's an evergreen, flowers if it's a dicot. So we have, this is showing averages over several years with changes. So you see in the early spring there's some big fluctuations based on weather and other things like that. Under climate change, that bloom has been moving forward in time a couple of weeks over the last century, it looks like. So we want to be more specific about that. So in order to do this, rather than studying the entire image, we're trying to work out some methods to narrow down which pieces of the image we should be focusing on at a particular time. So we can do a clustering method looking at the images across time. Originally we were looking at early spring. I just changed my mind. I think we're going to switch to fall as the baseline. And we could set up subsections of the images that are what we're going to do the color analysis on based on that. So if you look at in January, this is what the Harvard forest looks like. And then a little bit later, I don't know if you can see the difference, but it's turned a little red. And that's because the maples up here in the foreground, back there, the buds are expanding and opening for those flowers. So really we want to concentrate just on those sections of the image and not be distracted by other things that are going on in the image. We just want to look where those buds are to do our analysis. So we can create a set of masks associated with that. So we can use the cluster analysis, and then we can pull each of those the colors out in a period of time and create these masks. And then we can overlay the masks over each of the images across time, so that we're focusing only on subsections. The consequence, so this is the same image or same view from the PhenoCam camera, but in July. So we can use that filter, so I'm just applying the same filters later on to recognize different pieces. I think this is the evergreen mask. I forget which mask this is. And then we have a deciduous mask. So the evergreen trees stay green all through the year. So if you do green analysis in the winter, you pick up the evergreen trees, you know where those are. So you can subtract them out essentially and not pay attention to them. So the output that we get then is something like this. This is the normalized green and red level for the area under a particular mask. And actually, I think this might be the overall image. I forget. But you can see that when spring comes, at the 110th day of the year up in Massachusetts, suddenly you get a giant peak in the green. But what we're really looking for is, look, there's a little peak in the red right before the green comes on. And that's probably the maple trees shifting to red prior to being covered up by the leaves that come out next. And then this is just human data superimposed on our red color spectrum. So each of those lines represents a different phenophase average from a few hundred observers in the region of Massachusetts. And when they said was the beginning and end of each of the phenophases. And then we've superimposed that on our curve to see if we can identify peaks and troughs associated with each of the phenophases. There's a lot of work to go. It's going very slowly because we're just doing it on the side. But this is just some of the other approaches we'll be taking. All right. Now I'm jumping to the other one, is topic analysis, which I've spoken about before. And mostly, I say what that is first. So topic analysis is just using statistical methods to count the occurrences of words and the difference in frequency of occurrence of words within documents to try to identify themes within those documents, or topics, and then identify those. But we want to go one step further. Rather, we're looking at the National Science Foundation summaries of grants, and we're looking for what are the topics that are different from the funding agency that's actually funding it. So the funding agency has a statement about what it's about, and what we're interested in is there a discrepancy between what the funding agency says it's about and what it's actually about. I could skip that. Okay, so Yan worked on this last semester, and she was the one who probably did the most work on this last semester and sent me her slides. So that's what I'm going to show you. So she analyzed the division of Computing and Communication Foundations, which is part of SIZE, a subsection of SIZE. And she did, well, this is the layout. I'm not going to spend, so it's general, you have your data set that we pulled out, pre-processing and structuring, and then feeding it through the topic analysis algorithm, and then doing the analysis afterwards. And you get output like this. You get the topics identified. Each document is given a gamma level, or the degree to which that document is associated with each of the topics that were identified. So once you decide how many topics there are, you can run the algorithm. Then you can allocate, so each document has a certain affinity to each of those documents. But this algorithm doesn't tell you what the topic is. It doesn't give you a name, it just says it exists. But you can do things like look at the most frequently occurring words, or look at TF-IDF differences in weights of the most frequently occurring words compared to other topics. And looking at that, it can give you an idea of what the meaning of the individual topic. So this is just some of the visualizations you can use that she used for identifying what the topics actually were. And we don't have to look at the details. She did, because of the computational complexity, what she did is binned several years together and then looked over a couple of decades. She couldn't do year by year because the computer couldn't do it. She didn't use JetStream or any of the HPC. Maybe we'll do that next. Some students have used the HPC for this, but she didn't. And the conclusion here, what I should point out, is there were standard topics that continued all through the period that fit what you'd expect for that particular directorate. But over time, we got new topics like quantum computing and machine learning popped up later in time. And also, she picked up COVID. There was extra money spent in NSF. They gave money and said, do anything you can. And almost every directorate spent money on that. And it turns out she picked it up and the algorithm found it as well. And public health in general as new topics. I think I'm probably out of time. So I'm just going to stop there. So thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Bratt. I'm an assistant professor here. But today I'm going to be going through a whirlwind tour, as is characteristic of my style, of a couple projects. And these are all under the umbrella of what I'm calling, actually borrowing, from one of the sociologists of science here at the U of A, which is the dark matter of the scholarly communication universes. As we'll see, there are multiple. So thank you to Erin Leahy for that. And of course, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that this land where all of our research goes on is that of the Tohono and Yaqui, the ancestral lands where this university now stands. So what do we mean by dark matter? Am I trying to be an astronomer? No, not really. But the idea is that there are some aspects of the sociology of science in the context of science that are difficult to observe. And a lot of the projects that my lab is working on right now are some of these. These include data sets, software, and code. And like dark matter, these are the intermediary products of science. They're often not well indexed in the scholarly universe. And they still have a very strong influence. How many of you here have heard of data-intensive science? Everyone. The idea being that even though there's not mature infrastructures for some of these entities, they still have a great deal of influence, and they need to be inferred from the spaces in between as of right now. So the research streams that I'm working on that the projects encompass include kind of three main tracks. These include practices, archives, and metrics. And of course, these all influence each other because metrics will influence the ways that we identify information in archives, and practices constitute the maintenance and continuing evolution of our archives. So in these three projects, I'm going to go over data sets in the global supply chain, as we're saying, and that's part of the archives stream. Then we're going to look at software mentions, very hard problem. It's about one slide because that's all the progress we've made, but get ready for that. And then how are librarians using AI for data services? And then a bonus project, if I can talk really fast. Just kidding. I won't talk too fast. So the first project is a collaborative project with folks from the sociology department, as well as UIUC, and from Eller College of Management. And recently, Sarah's TV. Yay! So, who here has heard of helicopter science? It's a concept that refers to when researchers will sometimes go to other locations and then perform scientific studies, and then come back to potentially a north or western context, and sometimes those findings can be misinterpreted. So, in the context of helicopter science, we see that data-intensive science, especially in the biological sciences, is becoming a wide division of labor. So we see that modern teams, as the engine of science, have a wide division of labor, especially in genomics. So given this division of labor, we wrote a paper that was presented at the International Conference of Science and Innovation this summer. And based on this, we found some interesting outcomes that scientists that are from the global south, that is from lower and middle income countries or lower income countries, tend to occupy only 33% of the leading positions. Now you have to take my word on this. I didn't give you any methods, but we have a paper and I'm glad to share it with we are now asking this question and pursuing this problem in an ongoing project, so please come and join us if you have expertise in this area. And the question is, are publication authors affiliated with the same geolocation from which the data set was collected? Now, this is not done at scale, so we're trying to find some interesting sources of data to answer this question, to address this question, shall we say. So, first thing we're doing is we're looking at the journal Nature Scientific Data. And here, we're trying to extract geolocations from the abstract to see if we can infer if data sets are from that location. Then we will look at the affiliations of the authors and see if there's alignment or disalignment there. So far, we're thinking maybe we can filter by each collection to get a little more context. But as of right now, it is still a work in progress. For example, you'll get a title like this, 12,000 Rustian paleo gastropods, I wish Megan was here, from a northeastern Pacific latitude gradient. Yeah, that's very imprecise, so we need to look at the abstract, but then it's not as specific as, say, the method. So in the methods section, you will get information about precise geolocation. Shout out to some of Stephen Say's work, maybe help to this, where we have to look at a particular section to extract that information. Clearly don't do karaoke that much, I keep moving around the microphone. So what are our ongoing steps here? So we're also going to be using the biosamples pages of the National Center for Bioinformatics Technology, NCBI, something like that. And this actually has more structured data about the geographic location of the data set. Huzzah! So we don't have to potentially go into the ambiguity of abstracts. We can look at the geographic location here. Inconsistent metadata though, so Sarah Stevie is helping with this aspect of scraping this data from biosamples. That's one ongoing project. Not sure how much time I have, but here's another project. Ooh. This one's also a little bit tricky, but here we're trying to look at software mentions, working with folks at Fairfield University and University of Tennessee, Knoxville, old friend from Syracuse. So, software, we've got a disambiguation problem. Am I almost at time? Oh, great, okay, thank you. So, wow, software is driving the data-intensive revolution. People love very catchy names for their software. PRISM, oh, model dispersion. PRISM, access data from the Oregon State Prison Climate Project. PRISM, a framework for loosely coupled XAML. PRISM, oh my goodness. Lots of PRISM. So, currently, we have a data set that was developed by the Chan Zuckerberg Institute that claims to be fully disambiguated. It's a great data set, and this is a hard problem, so kudos to them. We have found some issues with that data. Unfortunately, they sometimes will collapse all those PRISM entities into a single type of software. So here, we are currently writing up a grant to solve this, try to solve some of this issue by disambiguating those software entities. And so far, we've tried to use Palm AI and ChatGPT to ask, hello, does this software entity match this ontology, let's say in PyPy library? So we're currently working on that. And we've gotten some decent results, but only for PRISM. So we might have to do this only for Python libraries, I should say. We should do this a little more with a little more specificity for software that falls outside of those sort of conventional, well-structured ontologies. So far we have manually labeled 1,000 examples of PRISM. We need an army of undergrads to help us, so no any undergrads. Now we're running these Palm AI to see how that performs, and we're adding context data from OpenAlex and Semantic Scholar on journal and topic classification. I'm probably nearly out of time, but I'll give a small overview of this related, this study on AI for data services. And this was work with Gabby Schreiner. Yay. So, GLAMs, so Martin Frike has recently done some work on AI in libraries, and you all have probably heard that AI for data services is being more and more used, such as for embedded AI in data flows. So in when there's a risky environment, will follow the lead of other institutions and adopt those practices. So we saw that a little bit within library data services for AI. And this can be problematic if you're following some of the norms of industry leaders who have different incentive structures than, say, libraries. So based on this, we are currently submitting an IRB to ask some of these, to pursue some of these questions. What AI tools are libraries, archives, and museums currently using for data services? And then what are those communities of practice that are organizing to foster and advocate for AI literacy? And this is work with Berlin and Diana, Christiana, and Xuan. And this is a wonderful study that I'm excited to continue to chat with you about in these research sites. And with that, I will show you my end campus slide about this project. Boom. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for being here. My presentation is called Kairotic and Kin-Centric Archives, and I will share my methodological and theoretical foundations for an ongoing research project to consider when archives and the communities they represent engage to consider memories and memory-making contexts as the building blocks of livable futures. Inspired by Audre Lorde, I too believe that we must move away from the singular to multiplicity, kinship, and coalition across difference. Of coalition, she says, it means actively working for change, sometimes in the absence of any surety that change is coming. It means doing the unromantic and tedious work necessary to forge meaningful coalitions. I start with bodies. Bodies are thick, dense, animal, connected to the earth. Bodies give us access to the world around us. Bodies are how we know. In my book, Producing the Archival Body, I write extensively about how bodies and archives are intertwined. The body offers a relational foundation for understanding and knowing one another, humans and non-humans, across time and place. My work attends to bodies broadly defined in the archives. You can see here the more formal definition of archives, especially note the processes that designate them as archival. As both an archivist and archival studies scholar, archival practices and processes are integral to my understanding of what an archives is and what it can do. Centering community archives as my sites of inquiry, I ask what a framework of the body can offer archival studies as a discipline. Here I think about multiplicity and multimodality. I understand multimodal design as implying a deliberateness about choosing the modes for representation and the framing for that representation. Multimodality through deliberate and accessible design practices then opens the potential for storytelling to function as method and methodology in its own right. I consider storytelling an approach through multiplicity that can encompass telling, listening, and sharing, as well as connecting, assembling, and also disassembling community. I focus on relationships and the relational aspect of storytelling. Storytelling is centered on relationality and, as Robin Wall-Kimmerer also suggests, reciprocity. It is a relationship that we enter into as storyteller and as listener together. And so digital storytelling is the practice of using computer-based tools to tell stories. It is a way to combine the art of telling stories with multimedia, including graphics, audio, and video, a means to share stories through the senses digitally. I turn now to the concepts in the title of my talk. Kairos is understood in ancient rhetoric to be the opportune or appropriate time, and such a definition implies for me the spontaneous, sometimes unplanned or unexpected, a moment of surprise that may or may not repeat itself. It also incorporates elements of context, physical and digital spaces, and attitudes. Consider the ethical, contextual, and temporal implications. Who can come together and in which space, and how might the timing work out? Who has access to such kairotic moments and the presence to understand it as such? Kairotic spaces, according to disability studies scholar Margaret Price, quote, are the less formal, often unnoticed areas of academe where knowledge is produced and power is exchanged, unquote. Price characterizes a kairotic space through real-time unfolding of events, impromptu communication, participants present in person or virtually, a strong social element, and with high stakes. The defining element of kairotic space, as I'm working with it, is the pairing of spontaneity with high levels of impact, be it professional or academic or relational. Attention to relations of power is of great importance in understanding kairotic space, as is recognition that different participants in kairotic spaces will perceive those relations differently. If we think about community and intergenerational historical contexts, we might expand our definitions of kin-centric to think about their queer potential, the chosen and then the surprise connections that can erupt through the archival processes, shared histories, and shared knowings, especially in the context of manufactured unbelongings and dominant erasures or absences. How do we embody and model our work and thinking to give life to our projects? We must have faith in the seeds that we sow, the ideas that we plant, even though we may never know who are enlivened by our work. Through time, we gather generations. The archives, too, gathers generations and must attend to generative thinking to be accessible and to be sustainable. Our stories are our seeds that we're planting. Stories last. Ensure descendants have cautionary and success tales. Emerge collectively. Take time and engage people living in the right relation to place. I ask you to hold these concepts in mind and heart as I pivot here to ask if we can begin to pay a more careful and different attention to one another, the human and non-human, and to our environment and our landscapes. I will begin this next move into my project with a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass. She states, quote, "Ruined land was accepted as the collateral damage of progress," unquote. She draws on Indigenous scholars, activists, and scientists who argue that we can't meaningfully proceed with healing, with restoration, without restoration. Our relationship with the land cannot heal until we hear its stories. We experience our environment differently when we see ourselves interconnected, and especially through what Karen Brad and James Bridle have conceptualized as intraconnected, a process of becoming phenomena and becoming bodies taking place through touch. Thinking through climate justice, then, I'm working to incorporate this definition through intraconnectedness and the importance of storytelling to reimagine what bodies are recognizable and what futures might be understood as livable and therefore possible. My climate justice related project started in 2006, rather kairotically and kin-centrically, as a film called Awamiel Secrets of the Agave, which focused on the U.S.-Mexico borderlands where Texas, New Mexico, and northern Chihuahua, Mexico meet. Today the project is called Secrets of the Agave, a climate justice storytelling project, and is rooted in everyday stories from the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. Here you can see the homepage of the project's website in both Spanish and English. As a digital humanities project, Secrets of the Agave builds on the 35 hours of film footage, digital storytelling workshop recordings, and community storytelling circles. With an informational website, pedagogical tools, a growing cohort of teaching partners, and a digital archives that will be launched this spring, I'm especially excited about the ways that communities can participate. Secrets of the Agave is a working model for fostering spontaneous interactions, lessons, and solutions across local and transnational contexts. It features everyday experts as primary resources in identifying, collectively combating, and reimagining climate change through everyday practices of ecological, economic, and community sustainability. People of color and those experiencing poverty are disproportionately affected by climate change and climate change mitigation policy. Their presence has been centered on deficit-driven demographics. Their everyday stories, experiential and traditional, are often missing from the data. This project amplifies and offers their distinct and abundant cultural perspectives that fortify, animate, and complicate data sets. Inspired by artist and researcher Mimi Onua, who argues, quote, that which we ignore reveals more than what we give our attention to. It's in these things that we find cultural and colloquial hints of what is deemed important. Spots that we've left blank reveal our hidden social biases and indifferences, unquote. This project actively intervenes in those indifferences. Kairotic and Kin-Centric archives hold the potential to recognize the gaps in community histories, and not just to fill them, but to reimagine the structures in which our underrepresented histories can be a part of coalition building across communities. Let's create livable futures. Kairotic and Kin-Centric archives and those non-dominant communities that participate in these community-based archives are asking for us to do more and do better. Thank you.
I'm Zack, Lischer-Katz, assistant professor here at the School of Information, and I'll be talking about curating and preserving visual information. So I look at, in my research, visual information and digital curation at levels of artifacts and institutions and practices. So you might ask, what is visual information? And so we think about objective models of vision, where we study the physical and cognitive capacities of people to perceive visually on one hand. But then think about visual information, where we're looking at how we go from perception to knowledge, how we, so visual information, not just perception and data points, but how do we form knowledge from that? And so we can see this in many cases. Meteorologists working in their weather centers, trying to make sense of the weather, analyzing specimens, butterflies, things like that, or even in your own homes, curating your photo collections, right? And it helps to think about vision on one hand, where we study cognitive perceptual capabilities, and visuality on the other, where we're looking at the cultural, historical, and institutional, conventionalized ways of seeing and perceiving. And the other side of my research is digital curation. What is that? The Digital Curation Center defines the work of digital curation as maintaining and adding value to a trusted body of digital information for current and future use. And this term embraces digital preservation, curation, and the management of digital assets throughout their whole life cycle. And in my research, I focus on the point of creation up in the top right corner of the circle there, as well as points of transformation, access, use, and reuse. And we'll see that when I talk a little bit about 3D data and how that's created. So I draw on earlier research, which I've talked about extensively, but I'll just mention it briefly. I studied preservationists who worked in film and video labs and how they preserved analog videotape and the material practices and visual epistemologies around that. So thinking about small-scale digitization practices and really getting into the ethnographic sort of field work of that. And from those studies, I realized that it's important to study the actual work of information creation and curation in the spaces where it happens. And this is, common approach in science and technology studies, where you go and look at scientists in the field or in their labs and see how they actually do the work, not just what they say they're doing, but how what they're actually doing there. And so I also found that preservation standards and best practices, which are really popular in library information studies, their adoption really depends on beliefs of practitioners and how their institutions are constructed and sort of institutional dimensions. So looking at those really can tell us whether these standards and best practices we develop will be adopted, how they'll be adopted, or whether the practitioners will just ignore them and resist them. So we need to think about that when designing tools and infrastructures. So there's two projects going on. First, this got announced already, but last year I was reporting on this project where we had gotten rejected for our grant application. This year I can say we got the grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services. Thank you. Yes, it was nice to get that in July, 5 days before the grant was supposed to start. So it's always nice to shuffle your plans in the last days of summer as you're starting out. So this is a partnership of my colleague at Harvard Library. It builds on our earlier research working with Virginia Tech, Indiana University, and the University of Oklahoma when I had a postdoc at Oklahoma. And we identified a need for a digital curation framework to support 3D and VR-based research, so scientists and humanists who are using 3D and VR in their work. And we also issued a report that went out through the Council on Library Information Resources, which has been downloaded quite a bit. So that's helped establish a research space for that. And we will be starting our data collection in February. So we finally got IRB approval after a grueling process of back and forth, as we all enjoy that process. And IRB definitely does their job. One goal of the project is to develop guidelines for 3D curation workflows across disciplines. So we use qualitative methods for this study. Currently we're recruiting 6 research labs. The first one we'll be visiting in February does biological research on organisms. They actually have this really cool 3D photogrammetry rig, which is a dome of cameras. You can kind of see in this picture here, where the living creature can be captured and a 3D model can be created without harming the creature. They might get a little freaked out, but fine, I've been told. So there's practical implications for supporting 3D data reuse across disciplines, also supporting the use of these 3D data sets in immersive visualization techniques like VR, AR. And then there's theoretical implications that I'm really excited about in terms of understanding the role of visual formats in the production of scientific knowledge. And looking at different disciplines, we'll be able to compare visual epistemologies across different fields, which would be really interesting as well. Another project on volumetric video. So this is another emerging visual format that I'm excited about. I'm working with Bryan over at the Center for Digital Humanities. Last year, we got a grant through the National Endowment for the Humanities for a planning grant for the Digital Humanities and Innovation Fund. And we're wrapping that up now. We have some deliverables from that project. We created a volumetric video deliverable. We went to Berlin, Germany, and we went to this very high-end professional volumetric capture studio where they filmed things like The Matrix and a lot of Hollywood type level big budget projects. It was also exciting for me as a former film historian and film theorist to go to Germany and see these studios. So this Volleycap Studios is actually at Studio Babelsberg, where Fritz Lang filmed Metropolis and some early German silent era classics. So that was exciting to me as well. So some things that came of this project. So this is a planning project. We did the prototype. We started to develop a preservation curation plan. We found a number of problems, challenges, let's call them, with volumetric video. If you saw here, that green arrow is pointing to a camera. This whole room was filled with over 40 cameras, and all that data has to be processed. So we're dealing with huge data sets of 200 terabytes a minute. And so thinking about how to curate that, what points in the workflow do we want to capture and archive? We're doing very large files, so we can't keep everything. We have to appraise and select those files. And archival practice really helps there. We compared that to what Bryan is doing at the Center for DH. They're dealing with large files too, not quite as large, but they have quality issues. And in both cases, we found that these systems are not portable. They're large studios. And a lot of the participants in our project are, they don't want to travel to Berlin or to Tucson. And so the next phase of the grant is developing a portable volumetric capture studio. So we asked for funding to bring our partners in Berlin here to Tucson to help us design this rig and test it out. So we'll see. That's the next step, is the level 2 grant, which we just applied for 2 weeks ago. That went in for about 3 times as much money as the first grant. The first grant was $50,000. This will be $150,000. And then if it goes well, we'll do the level 3 grant. The main goal is to develop this portable, high-quality volumetric capture station that we can use and bring around the country and use it for digital storytelling and for research and pedagogy. And the secondary goal, and why I'm involved, I was brought into the project, was establishing design criteria for volumetric video access and preservation platforms. So right now, he's using these systems to create these 3D video files, but there's no hosting platform for it or a way to make it accessible. now, we upload it to a third-party application, and they send a QR code, and then we can scan that. But something where we can work with the library or other institutions to archive these files and make them accessible would be great, so that they can be findable. Right now, it's a very bespoke process where each project has files, and we share them with just the people on the team or the project, but it would be great to make these more widely available. Thinking about licensing questions, copyright, things like that will be important issues to resolve. And then we're looking at metadata standards and preservation quality file formats for long-term sustainability. So that's kind of where we're at. So as I'm starting up the IMLS grant, we'll be waiting to hear about the NEH grant, and you can kind of see that volumetric video and 3D data, there's a lot of overlap, so I'm excited to see some synergies between the two projects as well. I think that's it. I guess we'll save questions to the end, but thanks for your time.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cheryl, and I'm an assistant professor here at the School of Information. So my research mainly focuses on human-centered data science, and I create the end-to-end data science methodologies and apply them to different domains to address the real-world challenges. So this work is one of our research paper. So it focuses on the work domain in the remote work domain. So in recent years, remote work has been very popular, right? And there also emerges a lot of challenges like the productivity, the work-life balance, and the emotional issues, right, in remote workers. So in this work, we use Emojis to predict dropout of remote workers. As I mentioned just now, one important challenges in remote work is the significant emotional issues due to the isolation. A report from BBC shows that a large amount of remote workers suffer from emotional issues such as loneliness, stress, and anxiety. However, due to the lack of face-to-face communications, it is much harder to observe the emotions of workers. One evidence from the report by Googly says that the employees spend half of their working time communicating in writing. Okay, so since the remote workers are relying heavily on their online platforms for communication, is it possible to use this kind of online platforms as a channel to monitor the emotions at scale? We've noticed that emojis are increasingly popular in recent years in the work-related communications. And what's more, emojis are actually very popular in communications worldwide, and they were adopted by the Unicode in as early as 2010. So our idea is that can we use the emojis to monitor the emotional well-being of remote workers in the remote work environment? So we put this analysis on GitHub because the developers or the users of GitHub have been remote workers for a lot of years, and they have been communicating and collaborating on this platform, and they are very familiar with this type of remote collaborations. So first, we looked at the emojis used in different types of posts on GitHub. And it is not surprising that the overall usage of emoji is much less than the usage of emojis on social platforms like Twitter. But we can find that in some type of posts, such as the comments to pull request and the commit comments, there are relatively higher frequency of emoji usage. And these types of posts are actually related to the contribution of code, and we can, like, by looking at the top emojis used in different type of posts of GitHub, you can find that the facial expressions and the gestures, so this kind of emojis are related to emotion expression, which is similar to what we can find on Twitter and other social platforms. At the same time, we can find some emojis that are really specific to this platform. For example, the rocket here can mean deploying, launching, or shipping a project or code on this platform. And the ticket here means that it can be used in issue tracking and technical support. So this usage, this heavy usage of this kind of emojis shows that emojis can be very specific to some highly specified context of working. So as we are interested in how can we use emojis to monitor the emotions on this platform, however, we do not have the broad truth about the emotion status of the users or the remote workers. But what we know is that the emotional status or the well-being or the mental health status of workers are highly related to their working status. So in the next step, this figure shows the relations between the emoji usage and the working activities. So we grouped the workers according to their activity level, and we can see clear pattern here that the emoji posts, which means the posts with emojis used in them, are highly correlated with working activities regarding working hours and the number of push events on this platform. And we further ran some regressions, which shows that the emoji usage is really dependent on the work status measurements. So we found that the emoji usage is highly reflecting the working status of individual developers. Furthermore, we wanted to check out whether emoji usage can be a good indicator of the working status, and more specifically, we use the emoji to predict whether one developer will drop out from this platform. More specifically, we define the dropouts as whether a developer active in 1 year will drop out in the next year. And we found that the non-emoji users, meaning the users haven't used at least one emoji in the first year, have a 3 times higher ratio of dropouts in comparison to developers who had used at least one emoji. This is really significant difference here. And furthermore, we use machine learning models to predict the dropouts for emoji users. In particular, we use only the features that related to emojis, and we excluded the non-emoji based features. So we can see whether the emojis, which is a good representation of emotions, can be a good indicator of the future working status. Okay, so we used several machine learning models, including GPT, Logistic, SVM, and MLP. We can see that although we grouped the developers by their activity levels, we can see that the models are performing good in different groups. And we look at the accuracy, we can see that we can achieve at least 0.7 accuracy for different models, and we can achieve as high as 0.75 for some group of developers. So we can see that using emoji features alone can effectively predict the dropout of developers. And we did some further interpretations based on the models. So we can see that the general usage of emojis are very important in this prediction, and also we can notice that some features calculated from the emoji usage that can measure the emotional status of the users are really very important. And some individual emojis like the thumbs up, like the smiley face, are also very important in this prediction, which means that the expression of emotions where emojis at all can be a good predictor of the outcome of working. Okay, so this is basically about this project, and some of our ongoing projects are doing some following work, including investigating the causal effects of these emoji-related features, and also some randomized controlled trial experiments to study the causal effects of using different emojis in the context and their effects on working-related outcomes. Okay, Thank you, that's it, and looking forward to more discussions and potential collaborations. Thank you.
As you all know, I'm Berlin, assistant professor here, and Jennifer Rochelle, also assistant professor here. We're working on a research project on libraries and prisons in Arizona, specifically on library services to the incarcerated folks in the state of Arizona. And I'm just going to start by setting up the scene with a few statistics to help us understand the landscape of these services. So in the United States, there are approximately 2.3 million people incarcerated in the United States. That is a little bit less than 1%, but it also, in other terms, you can consider it about 1 out of every 10 people in the United States. So it sounds a little bit different when you put it that way. And approximately 50,000 of those folks are right here in the state of Arizona, incarcerated in state and federal prisons, and that number includes jails as well. Those are important numbers because Pima County Public Library, which is, of course, our public library here that runs 27 branches around Pima County, is the only library currently providing services to incarcerated folks remotely. So some of our libraries, and Jennifer will go over that later, but some of our prisons do have libraries, but we'll learn a little bit about what that funding looks like. And oftentimes, the Pima County Public Library is the only reference service available to these folks who are incarcerated. So there are other libraries around the nation that do this kind of thing. Libraries like New York Public Library, St. Louis Public Library. There is a national coalition working to increase these services. Let's see, I think that might be the only numbers I wanted to throw at you. But I also wanted to mention that Arizona historically has used incarceration instead of alternative services like probation or rehabilitation or any other sorts of treatment in order to redirect folks away from being incarcerated. All right, with that.
Thanks, Berlin.
So this research is very small and very brief. It just was last semester with a student who Berlin it was a knowledge reverse student or a knowledge reverse scholar, Rachel Scott, who works right now at PCPL. And she does part of the, sorry. Well, I guess I'll keep talking about her. So she does the kind of the books to prisons part of PCPL. And it's not really a division. The way she described it is just people, whoever helps out does it. So she's not even in a full-time library position there. She was, getting her MLS degree. And so she kind of is just jumping in and doing that. There's no set up job for that. It's kind of like whoever has time does it. And so that's kind of the state of where things are for, our libraries, and prisons in Arizona. I'm trying to think of what I was going to talk about next. Sorry. Bringing it back up here. Oh yeah, okay. So I supervised this independent study. I was previously a public defender. I've spent a lot of time in prisons and jails. And also I used to represent people in the immigration system too, in detention centers. So this is something that's really important to me. And then Jen Vidier also was another person who supervised this. She's the Law Library Fellows Program Manager. And she used to do appeals for people on death row for about 15 years. So she was also a co-supervisor on this. All right, and of course Berlin. So why are there prisons and libraries to begin with? So everyone has the right of access to the courts. When they're in prison, it's a constitutional right. So it is very important that people have access to library services when they are in prison. Lawyers don't often love when people do their own research during a case, but after your case is over, right, you are then possibly in prison for however long, maybe life, and you don't have a lawyer actively working for you. So it's a really good idea if we want to have a free society to be able to have people like that advocate for when there might be a mistake or when there might be a reason for them to advocate for themselves Supreme Court held that prison officials must assist inmates in the preparation and filing of meaningful legal papers with providing prisoners with adequate law libraries or adequate assistance from persons trained in the law. So everyone in Arizona who is in prison has this right now to have a library in their prison, or at least have people trained in the law to give them advice as to their rights. And why is this? So I'm just going to throw out a couple of examples. These have all happened before. But what if you had a lawyer with a serious health issue that died soon after your case? If anyone listened to the first Serial podcast, that was kind of the premise of his appeal. What if you didn't have a lawyer? Pre-1963, people were not guaranteed to have a lawyer. If they were in a state court, they did not have a public defender if they didn't have enough money to pay for one, or they didn't have a lawyer if they didn't have enough money to pay for one. What if you had a judge who was later revealed to have no prejudices? This happens. What if the police officer gave false testimony? There's a ton of reasons why it's really, really important to have the right to library services in prison and in jail. But of course, there's like a ton of other reasons that we can think of, right? So it's of course rehabilitation, there's educational opportunities, recreational resources, it's a healthy outlet. And this isn't actually, this isn't the law, but it's just my personal opinion. I think it's cruel and unusual punishment to not have some sort of library services for people who are incarcerated. And that is, of course, oh yes, and thank you, Berlin. It also prevents recidivism, and there's been a ton of research around this, so it's super important for preventing recidivism too. So Arizona. This isn't actually our fault, but this is probably one of the worst cases for library services to ever have occurred. And this happened in 1996. I forget which one was Lewis and which one was Casey, but I think Lewis was a prisoner who sued one of the prisons in Arizona because his the library services were not adequate in that prison. And it went to the Supreme Court, and so the Supreme Court held that you must show actual injury before you can bring a case. But this is like a classic catch-22 situation, right? Because if you don't have the resources to figure out how to show actual injury, how can you show actual injury? And in addition to that, it also can't be a frivolous claim. But how do you know it's a frivolous claim if you don't have any sort of resources or if you don't have access to any sort of legal information or courts? So while this doesn't take away the right to having libraries and access to legal services in prison, it takes the teeth out of it. So it means that it's not enforceable. So no longer can we, or it's very difficult for someone to sue anyone in the whole country for having inadequate library services in prisons. So what can we do about that? I mean, if you can't sue, what's the best next strategy? It's usually public outcry. So it's usually getting the information out to the public that something is inadequate. So that's kind of where we are. It's a long, long background for where we were headed for this research. So the good news is that there is a history of advocacy around prisons, prison libraries in Arizona. And Rachel Scott, the student that we were working with, actually knew about this survey that happened in 1875. You can't find it online. It's only in the state archives up in Phoenix, and it's also here in special collections at UA. But there was a survey conducted in 1875 as to the state of libraries and prisons, specifically in Arizona. And the survey covered women's prisons, men's prisons, and I believe juvenile detentions too. So at this point, when Rachel and I both had a chance to take a look at the survey, we decided to pivot and instead of just do kind of a literature review, we decided to actually do our own survey. We were trying to really replicate this. We didn't quite have the time to do that, but we did do our own kind of style of 2023 study of just the male prisons in Arizona, I should say. So in the future, we would love to do a more robust study. Berlin and I have been talking about ideas around this for a while. We weren't able to do that this run, but we did get some statistics from it. So this is from Rachel's poster that she presented, and as you can see, the highest, I think, percentage that we have only 12% have readers advisory or books club or book clubs or ranching programs. Everything else is pretty. 22% have even no programs or events at all. The budgets get even worse. 7 libraries had 0 budgets, like they have no money going towards library services. And then, as you can see, it's pretty minuscule. Except for one library that reported $20,000 as their budget, which would be phenomenal. I have to assume that is an error, and they probably meant to say 2,000. But we have not verified. So we would like to expand this in the future. First of all, what was the library extension service? How were they funded, and how can we get this back? Because that was great that they were able to do that. And I should say that that study found that services in 1975 they found that they were horrifically underfunded, that it was not enough, and it was like 150% more than it is today. So, we would also like to think about how we can create an internship with PCPL and Incarcerated Services for MLAS program, because they are just doing the best they can and they need more resources towards this. It also would be interesting to like add some questions around computers and internet. I know it's very limited to present that. And then also, surveys aren't the only way to get information. We can also do freedom of information requests, which we started to try. We kind of got denied in a lot of ways, but that's just the process. So if we had more time, we just had 1 semester. And then some other questions to ask are, what are library services like for in-profit prisons versus state-run prisons? Because we have a growing number of for-profit prisons in Arizona, and I think it would be really interesting to know the difference, to see what their library services look like compared to government-funded prisons, federal prisons, detention centers, and just also to point out, people who have immigration charges, they don't have the right to counsel. They don't have any sort of way to get counsel if they don't pay for it themselves. So we have oftentimes children representing themselves, and so this is especially important to be able to have access to information in detention centers. Yeah, anything else? That's it. Thank you so much.
Hi, I am Lila. I am an assistant professor here in the iSchool. My main research interest is virtual reality. Today I will be talking about a recent publication. So in this publication we explored how to leverage virtual reality to improve spatial skills. Spatial ability is important, and it is known to be improved by practicing relevant tasks such as mental rotation or spatial perception. So in this publication we explored a visual spatial cup-stacking task in virtual reality, and we wanted to explore if practicing this task in virtual reality would improve spatial ability or indicate an improvement, potential improvement in spatial ability. So cup-stacking in itself is visual spatial. So you need to orient the cups in a given pattern. But we wanted to make it a bit more challenging so that users would rely on their spatial skills a little bit more. So we flipped the interaction horizontally, similar to trying to manipulate an object, looking in a mirror. We flipped interaction horizontally, and we compared this, we call this mirrored interaction. We compared this with regular interaction, a baseline condition. And we hypothesized that this mirror reverse interaction would improve mental rotation a little bit more, would improve perspective taking and spatial orientation. And we also measured EEG, brain activity, and we hypothesized that it would cause more brain activity in terms of spatial processing and attention, because they would be performing the same task in an unfamiliar way. So this is the regular interaction, one-to-one mapping, and everything is nice and smooth. You can stack the cups really easily. We give the user a pattern, and we want them to stack the cups according to that pattern. And the pattern was available to them at all times. They could view the pattern as long as they wanted. And when they're done, they submitted their arrangement by pressing a button. And we gave them feedback on the correctness because we wanted them to repeat the task. And this is the mirror reverse interaction. Look how more challenging it looks and arrange the cups in the given positions. And as you can observe here, it took longer for participants to complete the task with this mirror reverse interaction. So we carried out a between subjects user study with 27 college age participants. Of course, spatial abilities differs within different age groups. So in this user study, we had college age participants, but it may differ in different populations. And we had them complete 15 cup stacking instances with different arrangements. So around 1 hour of virtual reality exposure, practicing the same task over and over with different patterns. We conducted pre-experiment and post-experiment questionnaires to measure their baseline spatial abilities, and then after practicing this task for an hour, we had them take the same test with different questions. So mental rotation test, if you're not familiar, it is similar to this. On the left, we see an object, and participants try to find the same object in 2 different orientations. So in this case, it's 1 and 3. And in the spatial orientation test, it's a little different. So you are given these different objects in different locations, and you're asked, for example, imagine you are standing at the flower and facing the tree, point to the cat. So participants just marked a position on the circle that you see here. We also collected EEG data to look into brain activity, and for this we used a Muse2 headband, which I'm not proud of, but because we used a VR headset, it was the most practical way. It's not that accurate, but it was the most practical EEG headband at the time to use. So let's talk about the results. Those are our 2 different groups, and in the mental rotation test, both groups actually showed significant improvement. Both our mirror reverse group and our control group with regular interaction. And in the perspective taking and spatial orientation test, only the mirror reverse group show significant improvement. So we can argue that cup stacking is already a good fit for practicing mental rotation. So it doesn't matter if we horizontally flip the interaction or not. Both groups' mental rotation abilities got improved. They did better on the test after practicing this task. And our speculation is that practicing distance and orientation estimations in an unfamiliar and challenging way in the mirror reverse condition could have helped with perspective taking. We didn't see any significant improvement in perspective taking in the control group. So the main benefit was in the improvement in perspective taking with this mirror reverse interaction. Let's talk about the EEG results. Briefly, we analyzed theta and alpha bands because those are known to be related to spatial processing. And it's expected that theta synchronization increases and alpha synchronization decreases during spatial working memory tests from previous literature reviews. And in our experiments, our participants in the mirror reverse group had significantly higher theta ERD than the regular group, which indicated higher synchronization, which was in alignment with previous expectations. But our alpha differed from previous expectations. We didn't see any significant difference in alpha band activity. We speculate that a possible reason behind this could be our task design, because as I showed you, the arrangement was available to the participants at all times. So no memorization or retrieval of information was required in our task, which we think could be the reason behind no significant difference. And here are some notable qualitative feedback from the participants. One of them said it was a little challenging at first, but got much easier as they got the hang of it. And another said everything seemed to work well. The only problem seemed to be them having a hard time mirroring. So it was a bit challenging to perform the task. So the main takeaway from this study really is go play video games to train on your spatial skills. And with that, I leave you. Thank you.
mount display wearing user and non-HMD wearing user. So our motivation for this project was to inherit this connection in VR. So the VR headsets inherently occlusive, and that's why there is a disconnection between HMD wearing users and non-HMD wearing users. So we thought that displaying the eye movements of the HMD user would create a more playful experience for the non-HMD user, and it will improve collaboration in games through this non-verbal communication. So for that reason, we have created this Googly eyes for depicting the user's eyes of the HMD user, and we use a smartphone as a display. We attach that on top of a headset, which is called full headset, which has a capability of real-time stereo eye tracking. And we use cartoonish style simple eye visuals to represent the user's eyes and their movements. So in order to test the effects of the Googly eyes, we have created a task. This game was designed around an archaeology team. So this is the head-mount display user, and they are on a virtual terrain walking around and trying to find a dirt pile and try to find a rock under that and examine that. And this game is played with two players. One is wearing a head-mount display, and the other is using a tablet computer. So the tablet computer has a user interface as seen here. So there are some definitions of the rocks and also a map there. So these two, one can see the rock actually, the other cannot, only see the definitions, and they are trying to identify the rock with communication. And on top of that, they need to locate the rocks and point them on the map as well. So we are trying to give them some opportunity to communicate even further.
So there are, there's like a little cluster
this is
tree.
the
It's right in line.
video from the preliminary evaluation. So we had 3 pairs, and we looked for social presence and enjoyment as well. These are the scores. We haven't compared with the control version here, but the scores were really high and motivated us to make a further user study with this. And also we have some observations during this initial user study. The tablet participants adjusted their positions and face to the head-mount display users. Although keep in mind that the head-mount display user cannot see the other user in this game. And the tablet participants used some hand gestures to define and describe the positions of the rocks. Although again, the HMD user cannot see them. So these are the motivations for us to make an even bigger user study. And we have completed a user study with 76 participants. We have looked for a sense of co-presence, sense of collaboration, enjoyment, affection, connectedness, which is awareness of the other user, and the level of confidence in their answers. So this will be presented in this year's IEEE VR conference in March. So that's it for me.
I studied the history of the book, and that's an interdisciplinary field that considers the book writ large, including magazines, newspapers, manuscripts, print and digital format. And it considers different aspects of the book or these other kinds of publications, including the material, cultural, and political elements of production, distribution, and reception. Lately, I've been working with the concept of paratexts. This is a theoretical construct that Gerard Jeanette is responsible for. He considers paratexts to be internal to the book, such as the title or a foreword, as well as external to the book, such as reviews of the book. And he says all of these things surround the main text in order to make the text present in the world. I'm focusing on two different editions of The Limits to Growth, the original in English published in the United States and the French translation published in Paris. This book came out in 1972, and it's a good way to use the book as a lens on history. So going beyond just the history of the book, but using the book as a tool to understand the past. A little background, The Limits to Growth launched this worldwide debate and was very controversial, in part because it used data from a lot of different nations, and some of the data was incomplete. And it also used new computer modeling techniques. And all the models that they came up with pointed in the same direction, which was that if nothing changed, the Earth was on track to collapse within 100 years. And again, this was published in 1972. So we should all feel a little nervous right now. It was translated into many different languages, and it was distributed in many different countries. The first little element of Paratexts that you notice when you look at the title of the French version is that it's posed as a question. So it's already challenging the original, The Limits to Growth. The book is 100 pages longer than The Limits to Growth, and that's because the French journalist who put this volume together did a lot of interviewing, wrote a lot of background information about some of the people who were involved and some important policymakers and environmentalists of the day, and wrote some commentary as well. So the translation of The Limits to Growth doesn't begin until page 131, so about halfway through. This raises the question, what is the text and what is the paratext? If you're an American reader, you probably would consider those first 129 pages to just be a kind of paratextual introduction to the main show, which is the translation of The Limits to Growth. If you're a French reader, you're probably thinking that the original portion in French is the main show, that's the text, and the Limits to Growth translation that follows it is more like an appendix. So one thing that I think this case indicates is that book history can help us understand environmental history. The Limits to Growth conceptualize the Earth as a single dynamic system of many interlocking subsystems. The French translation reveals this tension between that idea of the Earth as a single unitary system and an individual nation's sort of commitments to its own interests. And this currently we're seeing with the Paris Climate Accords of 2015, where nations, each nation has a responsibility for making its own commitment, its own goals to lessen the impact of climate change. it's a great example of how book historians can contribute to our understanding of environmental history, and I'm going to continue to work on it. Thank you.